Hi, this is Daniel with the Learn to Share project. If you're returning, I'm as ecstatic as a recording can be. But if you're new, allow me to give you my spiel on what this project is all about. This project is equal parts research and outreach, with a singular aim of helping combat purposelessness that I see young people today facing. I say this because I am among you and want to take the opportunity to learn from and share the lessons of leaders with a little more experience and perspective than you or I. I hope you can take a valuable lesson from this conversation. Enjoy.
It's really quick because I forgot to hit record. So this is a combination of a research and an outreach project, helping to try and combat the purposelessness that I find a lot of people my age and honestly myself facing all the time. And to do that, I figured best way to learn about purpose is to talk with people who have a little more experience and have had the opportunity to, lead people in learning what their stories are. So it generally boils down to about 4 questions, the first of which being, where does your story begin? And I would like to clarify this. It's purposely a little bit vague.
Okay.
I like to know, where does this person decide that their story begins? I've had people's stories begin as early as 7 years old. Some people start as their first or second job. So where does your story begin, Amber?
Yeah, that's a tough question. It depends on which story you're talking about, right? We have so many that are, no person is one story, right? That's how I feel. No person is one story. It's always, more than that. So if you're talking about my career, if that's what you're wanting to talk about and that purposefulness, I guess that would start with my parents. My dad is, he was a firefighter, but they work, 24-hour shifts, so only 10 days a month. And on his off days, he was a contractor.
Mm-hmm.
So I was on construction sites from a very young age. So I was interested in it and yeah, so I guess that's where the construction side kind of started. And then when I got into school, I liked math and science and had no idea what I wanted to do. I started college as a pre-law major. And then I thought maybe I wanted to be a teacher. And then I thought business. And then I liked math and science. So I had a really wise counselor who said, hey, if you pick engineering, you can kind of do any of those things. So I was like, sure. And at the time I thought engineering was like a train engineer, like I didn't even know what engineering was. So that's how it started, I guess, how I got into engineering in the first place.
And what do you do currently?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of a software company that does software for structural engineers. So, we structural engineers, I always kind of relate it to it's buildings, right? So a structural engineer is like the bones of a building. We're the ones that make it earthquake proof, wind proof, things like that. And the company that I run is software specifically for structural engineers.
One of my best friends is training to become a structural engineer right now.
Really?
So he'll tell me, oh, yeah, that's the kind of bolt you're using. He'll tell me the number that he finds it at, and his dad does structural engineering, so kind of fell into it. But it's cool to hear that. So sorry to interrupt on that. It's just
No, you'll have to ask him about, do
RISA?
You know RISA? Because his first, that's the company name of, and his dad for sure will know. I don't know how far along in his software, in his career is, but it's a pretty wide known, but it's just known to structural engineers, so.
He does most of the computer stuff for his dad. I could have sworn I've heard like RISA or something like that thrown around.
Yeah.
But back to your story, how did you find what you were gonna do? Like
Yes.
I heard you started with just went into engineering, but how did you find yourself where you are today?
Yeah. So after I graduated, so I didn't. First of all, I'm the first person to go to college in my family. So there was no guidance as far as thank you. There was no guidance as far as this is what you do, this is how you navigate a path. So it was kind of like, okay, that's why I started out in pre-law and I ended up, a year and a half later in engineering. I won't say it was easy. There's plenty of times, engineering is not an easy major. So, and I always say like I'm a scrappy person, but I'm not necessarily the Albert Einstein in the room, right? So when I got to Cal Poly SLO was where I went to undergrad. And when I got there, I definitely wasn't the smartest person in the room. And I think that what that taught me was if you really want something, you have to work hard for it, even if it's difficult, right? So I had never had a D in my life until I got to Cal Poly, and I got a D in a structural engineering class. And I was so upset about it. And I retook the class because I did not want that on my transcripts. And it just really taught me, like, if you really want to do something, you may have to work harder at it, but it's worth it, right? So I graduated from Cal Poly, and then I got an opportunity for a research fellowship. My plan was just to go work, but I got an opportunity for a research fellowship at UC Irvine. And I'd actually never even heard of Irvine because this is before smartphones or anything like that. If you didn't have like a paper map, there was no, so I thought it was like LA and then San Diego. So surprise to me, there was this place in between called Orange County, which is now where I've lived for 25 years. But so I ended up at UC Irvine. And then when I graduated, I moved back home. I'm from Monterey County, and I actually taught high school cooking. I got a long-term sub position at the high school that I went to. I was 22 years old teaching cooking. I'd never cooked in my life, so it was a definite experience. But it was great. I loved it. But I got this engineering degree, felt like I needed to use it, so I moved to San Diego, got a job there. Loved the company, hated the job. I cried.
What were you doing?
Traditional structural engineering. So I was doing calculations at my desk 8 hours a day, not really talking to anybody unless I made the effort. And it just did not fit, right? And my parents were like, then go back to teaching. You love teaching. That was so fun. But I'm like, but I spent 6 years getting this degree. Like, I at least have to get my state license. So I spent 2 years working there, and I just found a way to make it work, right? Enough experience to get my state license. And then I left, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So and at the time I was engaged and my husband was living in Orange County. He was super happy with his job. So I was looking for jobs up in Orange County, and I found a technical support position at a software company that did software for engineers, all civil engineers, but structural was one of them. And so I took it, and I loved tech support. You're talking to customers all the time. I loved like being close to engineering, but not doing calculations every day in, day out, no people's part, no people interaction. So at that company, it's not the same company I'm at now, but at that company, I think because I could talk and I was an engineer, they put me in sales. And I absolutely hated it. Like, absolutely hated it. So, but I always say give something a year, right? Because when something's hard, it's typically not fun. So you have to kind of master it a little bit to determine whether it's not fun because it's hard or it's not fun because it's just not fun, right? And so I gave it a year. I still didn't like it. I didn't like the competitiveness of it. I think I've learned now, looking back, that it wasn't that I didn't like sales. I didn't like that company's sales. It was very competitive. There was like stealing accounts going on. It didn't have the ethics that I was raised to have. So I didn't like that. So then I decided
kind
to
of like oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you there. To say very
Please.
like kind of like 90s Wolf of Wall Street, like everyone's going after everyone, kind of the bad reputation sales has in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, it felt like that to me. Maybe it wasn't that extreme, right? But it felt that way to me. And I'm really a team person. I want to work with a team. I'm very much like that even now. Like, we're a very team-based company. So to be this individual contributor, it felt like going back to engineering, where I was an individual contributor, but now I was doing sales instead of engineering. And it wasn't my bag, right? Like that wasn't what I wanted to do. So that company wouldn't let me go back to tech support, because even though I hated it, I was doing fairly well. So they didn't want me to like not sell anymore. So I took a job at the company that I'm at. I took a pay cut. It was a very significant pay cut to go back to tech support at the company I'm at now, but this is 20 years ago. And I loved it. And I actually never planned to really do anything beyond that, like maybe move up into management of tech support or something like that. But at that company, I was employee 10 at the time, and this is 20 years ago. And I just saw so much potential. I think maybe because my parents had a small business, I started asking our founder, like, hey, how are we like marketing to engineers, right? And he'd be like, well, it's just word of mouth. I'm like, yeah, but what if we did seminars? What if we did ads? What if we did? And he's like, sounds like you want to do marketing. And I was like, I don't know anything about marketing. I have a degree in engineering, but I just know that we could grow this business if we could do, you know, some of these things. And he was just really good about allowing me enough rope probably to hang myself, because I did that a couple times too, but just to allow me to like try different things. I took some classes online in marketing, and so I ended up in this marketing role. And then I started saying like, okay, this is really great. We're getting all this information from these customers, and we need to build what they're asking us to build, right, in the software. And I'm like, okay, so you can't just tell a programmer here, this is what a customer wants, to do it. You have to kind of guide them through, right? Like, okay, it should be easy to use, and it should do this, and it should do that. So that's kind of how I shifted into product management, from marketing to product management. And then from product management, it just started like being more operations. Like, okay, I want to build this product and it needs to market to this customer, and this is what we need to do to sell it. And it ended up being more like operations, because it's all of those pieces together. And that's how I ended up at COO level, was because I was kind of putting all those pieces that I had done together to kind of run the company. And then our founder wanted to retire. And so, you know, he wanted to be sure that the legacy of the company continued. And so when we were bought by this German holding company called Nemetschek, I took over as CEO, and that was about 6 years ago.
Okay. And you know, I heard you mention that you were given quite a lot of rope, and ended up, you know, tripping over it a few times. And that leads into what's tends to be one of my favorite questions, which is, in your time professionally, what's your proudest failure? And please allow me to clarify this question before you answer. I see failure not as a negative thing or a positive thing. It's a condition.
Absolutely.
But it's also one of the greatest ways to learn. So the question then becomes, what is your proudest failure, and what lesson did you learn from that failure that makes you look back on it with pride?
Man, I've made a lot. And any leader who tells you they haven't is lying, because you don't get where you're at without making mistakes and learning from them. I'd say overall, and this is not necessarily one thing, but kind of a trend when I first went into management, and I see this a lot when people first go into management, because leading people is hard. It's fun and it's super rewarding, but it's really hard. And I think
Hurting cats.
What?
Oh, I just made a bit of a snide comment. It's hurting cats.
Yes.
Sometimes.
That too. But I think that I always want to be the type of leader that people walk away and feel supported, right? And that's easier when you have somebody who's performing, right? But it's always the people who are underperforming that you don't really know how to handle. And I think earlier on in my management career, I was too soft in my delivery of what needed to happen, rather than just being direct and holding somebody accountable. And what happens when you're soft and you're like, oh, hey, Daniel, you know, you're doing a really great job. You know, I'd love for you to like work on this one thing, but like overall you're doing great. Well, if overall you're doing great and I'm asking you just for this one thing, typically that one thing is not what you're going to focus on, right? And so I think what I've had to do is say, you know, I see a lot of potential in you, but we have a problem, you know, and here's what I need you to fix in order to be successful at your job. Like just being a little bit more direct, not rude, you know, or anything like that, but just more direct. And it took me a long time, because then it's less confusing that way. So just be direct and then hold somebody accountable, I think is something I wish I had learned earlier in my career.
Thank you. So that brings me to my next question, which is, where do you find value every day?
Oh, that's easy. That's in people for me. So that, and people, and that can be, and I say that as a general because my employees and my customers are the most important thing in my business, right? So you can't say, if I say like, oh, it's the product, it's everything revolves around the employees and the customers, right? So for me, the most value I can have is in what the customers want and how we as teams are delivering that, but when they walk away at the end of the day, I want them to say, I'm proud to work at RISA. I love who I work with. I love what the company stands for and what we produce, right? Like that kind of, the people is what makes that happen on a day-to-day basis. And it's not a project or a product or anything, because that's got to be continuous, or else you're not building that culture that you want. So for me, that's the people are by far the number one thing.
So if I could expand on that question, is there anything in particular about the people that really draws you to that as one of the things that you find a lot of value in? Is it like connecting them? Is it, building them up to be as successful as they can? What does that look like in your eyes?
To me, it's growth. I want to see it. It's so rewarding to see people grow, and it could be growing in their job. It could be growing in their personal lives. But to see that growth and feel like you somehow helped contribute to that is one of the most rewarding things, right? Even if somebody comes and you're working together and you're growing and they outgrow your company, it happens, right? Especially for us, we're a small company. We have like less than 100 employees, so we're not huge. And sometimes they grow and they're amazing, but there's nowhere else for them to go within the company. Even that, which makes me sad, you still walk away with this rewarding feeling because you help them get to that stage of their career. You help them be, better and be able to contribute more. And I think that applies even like in the personal life. Like I have this employee doesn't work for me anymore. Again, outgrew us, but they had never bought a house. Their parents had never bought a house. They had no idea what you needed to do to like buy a home. They just knew they wanted to buy a home. Kind of like me, my first person in the family going to college. They were the first person to buy a house. And so, they came in, they asked me a ton of questions, and, I was able to kind of guide them through the process, and it felt really good at the end. They were so proud of their home that they purchased. Right. And, it felt good to be able to just help them learn some lessons that I was just taught by my parents. So,
can I kind of follow up this? I'm having fun kind of building out new questions as we go, if you don't mind. Sure. So when I have concerning kind of growth itself, now I'm not sure if this is something everyone struggles with, but I've seen a lot of people, and myself included, have struggled with, how do you know you're growing? I mean, is it a patience game? Is everyone so used to everything being so instant that they expect growth to be instant? And you can't grow a tree in anything under 10 years, let alone have it produce fruit in 20. Right. So how would you recommend going about evaluating if you're growing? What are some markers you might look for?
Well, I think you have to have the ability to self-reflect. And I think in general, that's something that our society is missing. You have to be able to, and this might go with, I have this term called Debbie Downer. I get in these Debbie Downer modes, right? Where I'm like, geez, everything is going wrong, right? Like, why can't, why is it always me? Or why is it, why is everything going wrong? And I have to stop, and I will literally do like a gratitude list, which is really a self-reflection. It's the same thing that you're asking for. What are the 3 things that I'm grateful for, right? That's in my Debbie Downer mode. But when it comes to growth, because I don't know, and maybe this is, I do find women are less confident in their roles than men most of the time. So like I tend to, at many points in my career, be like, oh, am I the right person for this job? Did they give the wrong person this job, right? And my way to reflect on that is to go, okay, what are 3 things that I'm better at now than a year ago or 2 years ago? Or in my case right now, I've been in this role 6 years. And when I really take the time to self-reflect, I think, wow, there's been a lot of growth in that 6 years. Meaning, like, I would sit in board meetings of this public company at the beginning 6 years ago, and they would have acronyms up the wazoo, right? Like every other word is an acronym. And I'd literally be on my computer Googling acronyms as I'm in these meetings, right? And now they throw those acronyms and 60,000 more that I've learned. And I'm like totally on it, catch. I mean, I know what they're talking about, right? So that's a small example. But the other is like dealing with employees, right? Like, how long does it take between the time you have a problem, you recognize the problem, and either that problem has resolved itself, right, or they're gone? That was a lot longer period of time in the beginning of my leadership role. So I think you have to, one, it's not immediate gratification, right? So like, you can't expect 5 years into your career that you're going to be CEO or whatever. You know, you got to look and say, like, it takes time for these things to happen. But even if you're in the same role, like same job, same title, same everything, what have you learned from that? Look back at where you were at the beginning. And if you don't feel like you've learned very much, it's probably not the right role. I mean, unless you don't want to learn and grow, then you're just happy with, you know, there are people that's not their goal, and that's fine too, right? They can stay stagnant. But if you are wanting to learn and grow, then you have to be self-reflective, and really look at what you've achieved during that time or what you've learned during that time.
Thank you. I got about 2 more questions, if that's all right.
Sure, yeah.
So the first of which being, it's not the same as the proudest failure question. This question is, which chapter in your story has taught you the most?
Oh, kids. That's an
Kids?
easy one. It is
What
not
about 'em?
anything to do with my career. So I have 2 daughters. They're both teens. I have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. My husband and I are opposites, right? I mean, we're both engineers because we met in grad school. But he always likes to say I'm a business person who got an engineering degree, and he's an engineer who got an engineering degree, and he's absolutely right. So we think very differently. My 16-year-old she looks just like me and is totally my husband's personality. And my 13-year-old is personality just like me and looks just like my husband. So my younger daughter, who's just like me, I know what she's thinking. I know what her next step is going to be because she's me, right? Like, it's super easy. Sometimes you look at it and you go, oh, that's me. So you kind of have to self-reflect on that. But I think my 16-year-old is probably the one that's taught me the most. And that's because she's taught me not just to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, like, because that's an easy thing to do. You go, oh, well, if I was Daniel, this is what I would ask, right? But if I was Daniel and I thought like Daniel and I had emotions like Daniel and I had reactions like Daniel, what would my next question be? And so it's really kind of forcing myself to think like her, right? Like, she's a very logical person, right? And so if it's not logical, then you're not going to get through to her. So, I have to think like, okay, how am I going to explain this in a way that she's going to understand, or how can I relate to her? And that really applies to life in general, because when you work with people, they're all different, right? So I can't expect my coworkers, employees, or bosses to react the way I would, because they're not me, right? And I don't think I ever realized that until I had her. And until I was, really, I would say, okay, I put myself in that person's shoes, but really, I didn't try to think like them. I didn't think about what their perspective was or how they communicate, So yeah, I think for sure she's been the one to teach me the most about communication, which is the core of everything.
Wonderful. It's a fun answer. I haven't been able to ask kind of a cool question and get like a more personal answer than that. So thank you.
Good.
So
my
my
girls
final
are my
question.
world. So if you ask me my first priority, and they're my entire world.
They're your world.
Yeah.
And my final question, this one always comes with a pass, because it's something that nobody talks about. Okay. Which is, how do you want your story to end? And please allow me to clarify this, which is, when you're gone, what do you want to leave behind? And I find this one interesting because I always get a different answer from people. And it's always a question that, I try and frame it as positive as possible. But you always get a really interesting answer. I've gotten, I want them to say, oh, look, he's moving, or, I want to leave behind a ton of grandkids, or I want to leave behind that I was a respectful person who influenced everyone positively. And once again, this question always comes with a pass.
I won't pass.
Okay.
But I guess my answer is probably a little twofold. So, I want to continue the legacy for women that my mom started to build, right? So that applies to my children, my friends, my coworkers, men and women. It's not just about only influencing women, but I think that, when my mom worked full time, right? And this is in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s when that really wasn't a thing, right? In fact, when my parents bought their first house, my mom's income wasn't allowed to be considered because she was of childbearing age. So a lot has changed since then, right? But there are still challenges for women in the world. And I look at it from a kind of point of privilege because I'm a white woman, but now you talk minorities and it's even more. But I hope that we have changed the world to where it can be a more equal place, that we can stop thinking about, oh, I can't wear certain colors and I can't act a certain way, that, when a woman or a man walks into a room, that it can be not thought of differently, right? Just considered the same. I would absolutely love that. And I think that can't happen until we start encouraging women to be able to be a mom and have a career, because now you're going to get women who are in like senior leadership positions who can make changes, I think that would be one side, is just women in general. And then, when my encouraging women isn't about in the workplace either, but I think that we have to encourage, like some of my best friends, were at-home moms, and that's an incredibly hard job, and I think that's undervalued as well. So I think in general we just need to. I hope when I leave, people go, man, she always encouraged me. She encouraged me to be who I was, right? She loved me for who I was. She accepted me for who I was. If I can leave that impression, whether it be, like I said, with my family, my kids, people I worked with, I think that's a pretty good legacy to leave, She made me feel better, right? She made me feel unconditionally accepted.
Sorry for the
Oops,
interruption.
That's okay. I missed the last part. Sorry, go say that again.
Oh, no worries. No worries. It's just a little bit of so I was saying something kind of like, sowing the seed for other people to grow. Which comes back to
I think that's a very succinct way to put it.
Thank you. And while I still have here, could I be talking about what do you do?
I'm sorry, I think you have a bad connection.
She ran a business. What was her business?
My mom?
No worries.
My mom actually
what did she do? What was her business?
She actually didn't run a business. She didn't run she ran my dad's business. She did all the books for my dad's construction business. But she was an executive secretary for a public utility company. She worked for Pacific Gas and Electric in Northern California, and she worked from she started at the bottom of the secretary pool, and she ended up being, a secretary to, one of the executive vice presidents or something like that. But she didn't have a degree, so she couldn't go beyond the clerical role, which is why she pushed so hard for me to have a degree.
Wonderful of her.
Uh-oh.
Is there a lesson that you learned from her that you still take along every day with you in your life?
I'm going to say it's an evolved lesson. So she always told me. Uh-oh. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Is it better? Okay, cool. I don't think it's a lesson. I think it's an evolved one. So she always told me, you you can do anything. You can do everything. You could be a mom. You can be a rocket scientist. You can be whatever you want to be. You can do it all. And I don't think that's necessarily true. What it did was give me the confidence to think that. But I think what I tell my girls is you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything. So you have to have a partner that's going to work with you, right? To build the life you want. And, you also have to realize that you can't be 100% at everything. So you have to choose where you're going to put your energy in and understand that some things are not going to be, you're not going to be Susie Homemaker and a CEO. It doesn't go together, like you don't have time to do both. So you have to accept that, you're going to put your energy where you want it. And then like me, you're going to, have food delivered or, like have somebody come pick up your laundry or whatever it is. And you have to be okay with that, So, yeah.
So kind of the lesson of you can do anything you want to. You have to decide what you
Exactly. Yeah.